And Democratic strategist Meghan Hayes, Republican strategist Rina Shah, and over here on the other side, we have CNN political analyst and New York Times correspondent Zolan Kano-Youngs and our own White House reporter Stephen Collinson, plus CNN political commentator and Republican strategist Shermichael Singleton, who's joining us from New York. Welcome to all of you. We're glad you're going to stay up. I think late. That's what I was saying to Zolan earlier. I think this is just late. Early? Late? I don't know. Shermichael, let's just start first with you because I know we've got you in New York. We just saw the former president making his final pitch to voters there in Grand Rapids. That, of course, is where he's ended his last three campaigns. Superstition or strategy to end it in Michigan tonight?
I mean, look, it's an important state. I don't know whether or not the former president will win the state. Perhaps he's attempting to drive up his numbers as much as possible to make it more competitive at the last minute for the Harris campaign. I think this ultimately comes down to Pennsylvania, particularly for Donald Trump. If he can win North Carolina, regain Georgia, win Pennsylvania, he gets to 270. If you're Vice President Harris, you would like to win Pennsylvania because it makes your roadmap to 270 a heck of a lot easier than losing Pennsylvania and having to win some of the other battleground states. So I got to be honest with you. I'm not surprised, Jessica, by how close this thing is. You see some incredible strength from the vice president as it pertains to women, younger women, women 65 and older. You're seeing some interesting strength for the former president with men, younger men. I think the question ultimately becomes for the vice president, will those women increase her odds, basically providing a buffer for the men that she will lose? For the former president, will those low propensity voters, those younger men, sort of provide a buffer for him for the women he's going to lose? You're at a tie situation. I have no clue how this thing's going to work out.
Everyone is looking for signs, including in Dixville Notch, where we had a tie.
Yeah.
As Gary Tuckman told me a few moments ago, Dixville Notch not indicative of anything. Meghan, I'm curious from your perspective. We saw Trump in three different battlegrounds today: North Carolina, Pennsylvania, now in Michigan. Harris decided to spend all day in Pennsylvania, 5 separate events there. What do you make of that strategy?
I think it's a smart strategy. If she doesn't win Pennsylvania, she doesn't win. So I think it's a smart strategy. I also think that she has a lot of surrogates, and she has Governor Walz also in different states. I think he was in Michigan today, or yes, in Michigan and a few other places. So I think that they are covering the map, but I think it's a smart strategy for her to spend time in Michigan.
And Rina, we heard, again, we're not short on contrast between these two candidates. I think we can all agree on that. And not surprisingly, in their closing messages, we're seeing quite a contrast there. Mm-hmm. Vice President Harris at times not even mentioning Trump's name in one closing argument that she made. Trump obviously going right after her very personally. What do you make of those two? Obviously, he's really trying to gin up that base. She's trying to make a wider reach. What do you make of that?
I mean, from a strategic standpoint, Trump failed at the assignment tonight. I mean, simply put, there's no other way to call it. Calling Harris a lunatic is not winning with anyone. I mean, there's this fringe voter out there that still wants to fight, still wants this incendiary language. But in general, what do you talk to about, with people who've lost their jobs or who are nervous about the economy? You talk to them about how you're going to keep more money in their pocketbook. And he has not done that. He's not stayed on the script for economy. He's not talked about geopolitical tension in a way that I think is responsible, ending wars, not sending people into conflict zones. And he could talk to women, but he chooses not to really go there because he knows that he's not trusted there. Whether you're talking a national ban or IVF, that's no good. But guess what? Women want talk on other stuff than their reproductive rights. Although that's so important and the galvanizing issue, I believe, in this election, he really could have gone so many steps further on the economy in Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Nevada, Arizona. I haven't heard it, and he's failed the assignment for me because he oscillates between cheating and then lunacy and all else.
Zolan, a critique that we've heard frequently from frustrated Republicans that would wish Trump would stick to his message. He did get in that line about, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? But then he starts weaving.
Yeah, he calls it the weave, right? I mean, I've heard from different Republican strategists who have said there are two clear political vulnerabilities of sort of the Biden administration that they wish the former president would continue to focus on. Inflation, which persisted for much of this administration, as well as the record number of illegal crossings at the southwest border. But he doesn't do that, right? Instead, you have two candidates that are very much portraying the country in two starkly different ways. You have the former president with increasingly dark sort of language branch around the country. And also just very much leaning into the retribution that he is seeking against his political enemies, even labeling his political enemies the enemy from within. On the other end, you have the vice president who has been sort of almost trying in an attempt to extend an olive branch to Republicans that cannot bring themselves to vote for the former president. She is trying to portray a message of unity, right? And that's a little bit of a shift also from earlier in her campaign, where she really focused on addressing that political vulnerability of the economy by talking about lowering housing prices as well. But I do think, to take a step back, it is worth noting it's not just like two different messages. It's describing two different realities of America that these two candidates are describing right now, which I think reflects just how divided the country is. And I was just in Pennsylvania this weekend, and you would talk to voters who would also relay those two different descriptions. 1 minute, you would have one person saying this country is in the wrong direction, which polling actually backs up many people in this country think is true. The next minute, you would have somebody that would affirm the vice president and say, I cannot bring myself to vote for the former president because of abortion restrictions as well.
I mean, Stephen, that's the thing that's so striking. I think you really hit the nail on the head, which is we are in America. Americans are living in very different realities depending on what they're reading, what they're watching, what they're consuming online. And yet we all live in one country, and there is going to be one winner whenever that person is named. Is it tomorrow? Is it today? Is it 3 days from now? We don't know. How do you what do you make of all of that, and just how we do live in different realities? So many people live in different realities.
So I've never covered an election in which the people on each side think their very way of life is under threat should the candidate that they don't support wins. Democrats are worried about democracy, reproductive rights, et cetera. Republicans see in the Democratic Party, which they think has gone far to the left culturally and socially, a decaying of traditional American values. And the country is changing, and some Republican voters feel threatened by that. Those two speeches were like a microcosm of this short campaign tonight. Harris was disciplined. There wasn't a great deal of substance, but there was a lot of emotion being expressed, calling on America's better angels. It was aspirational, optimistic. Trump gave that line about, are you better off, which any normal Republican probably could have used to win this election if it was any other candidate. But then he veered off into the extremism. The extremism and the outlandishness and breaking convention was the thing that made him a popular candidate, first of all, in 2016. It would be very ironic if that darkness is what finally ends his political career.
Another thing he mentioned in the speech that struck me, Shermichael, was this line about how the Republican Party has changed and, as he described it, become more inclusive. I don't remember a Republican presidential candidate doing quite as much to try to court Latino voters and African-American voters as Trump has on this cycle. Notably, though, with some missteps. And I'm obviously thinking of the Madison Square Garden rally just a week or so ago, where you had that comedian talking about Puerto Rico as a floating island of garbage. Obviously, Trump trying to court Puerto Rican voters today. I believe he had a number of folks as he visited communities that were compromised largely of Latinos. I wonder what you make of that effort, what grade you would give that effort, seeing as how I noted that he's had some missteps.
You know, that's been the fascinating aspect of Trump's candidacy, his persona as a political creature. You look at the 2012 race where he increased his margins with black men in particular. I think the largest margins a Republican received since Richard Nixon, of all people. Mitt Romney couldn't do it. John McCain couldn't do it. George W. Bush couldn't do it. But somehow Donald Trump, despite the rhetoric that may turn a lot of people off, was somehow able to do it. You look at the current number of African Americans in the House right now who are Republicans, a large number we haven't seen in quite some time. You look at the Senate. I mean, so it's interesting to see how the party has moved in a fascinating direction in terms of reaching out to men of color. I think there is an opportunity for the Republican Party, whether Donald Trump wins or loses ultimately in this race, to target those individuals, specifically men. I think women is a bit difficult. Rena pointed out the reproductive issue. I think she's 100% correct there. The Republican Party has to figure out a way to maneuver But for men, I think there are a lot of younger men of color who are looking at an America and a future in this country that doesn't really include them in terms of economic attainment. And so the question becomes for the former president, for the Republican Party in the long run, is there a conservative message that sort of appeases to the discontent that many of those men are feeling? And if you're going to go in that route, what do you do about the women, some of those suburban women who may like republicanism because of the economic issues? Or maybe they like republicanism because they generally believe that limited government is a better way to run the country. Can you get over that hurdle with Dobbs being overturned? I'm not convinced of that yet, Boris, to answer that question. But I think there's a possibility if you change your position and say, you know what, we've gone too far on this issue. It's not enough to just say states can vote, or states, rather, legislators can vote on this. We should give it to states and say the voters in those states can vote on it via a referendum. So I'm looking at a couple ways where the party can expand its current base with men of color, but also reach back to some of those suburban white women and say, wait a minute here, we understand we way overcorrected. We're going to try to correct this.
That's been kind of one of the more fascinating dynamics about this election, Megyn, is that we've seen things that were the conventional wisdom for a long time kind of they're getting upended. And this is unique. This election is unique in a lot of ways. But Shermichael was getting at one of those trends, which is seeing Trump and Republicans making really inroads with voters of color, particularly men, and seeing Kamala Harris running historically well, potentially, with white women, suburban women especially, that have historically been pretty Republican, started to come back or have swung to Democrats post-Trump. But it is kind of upside down in a way.
But I think that lends to where we are in our country and being so divided. I think you point out, I think both things can be true. People can think we're going in the wrong direction, but still not want to vote for Donald Trump. And so they could want, her whole slogan is a new way forward, a new generation of leadership. And I think that's so key here, because I do think that there are changes that need to be made, but I think that people are just tired of the chaos. And I think that's why she is attracting a new subset of people and attracting women, suburban women especially, because they just want to get their kids to school and to put food on their table. They do not want this chaos. They do not want to open the newspaper every day or turn on the TV and see all of the chaos that he created like he did in the 4 years he was president.
The issue, though, is going to be it's not just if men of color or any voter slides to Donald Trump. It's if they stay home for the vice president as well. And I have, just in reporting, come across many voters who feel that for decades that they've remained at sort of the bottom of the totem pole and been neglected by government as well. I think you saw that her campaign recognize that and try to issue an economic policy specifically for black men. But it's not just if they move to Donald Trump. It's also if they, feel this.
The coalition build. I think you bring up a good point. You're seeing a swath of voters that's broad in coalition and who care about this elitism that's on display. The great irony is that Donald Trump exhibits it every day of the week for the past 9 years. We see him as an elite, yet there's these voters out there who are frustrated with Washington and the sense that Washington does never speaks to their problems. I speak to women like that all the time. Childcare isn't addressed. The fact that we don't have enough money to take care of our children and also plan for the future. And we are in the sandwich generation. There's only one candidate who's spoken to that well, and it's been Harris so far.
A lively conversation for the panel. We appreciate all of your voices. Thanks so much for being with us. And Shermichael, to you in New York as well.
Meantime, some of the big